Fire Emblem 7, The Burning Blade, is the first Fire Emblem game to be released in North America. It's one of the first kind of JRPGs I really played, and it's one of the first games that kind of, or it's really the first game along with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask that really kind of opened up my mind to the artistic ability of video games. It kind of said to me, video games are quite as capable of telling deep and meaningful stories, of saying things about people, about characters, and that we can actually learn something about life from. That they're every bit kind of a legitimate form of art as books are, as movies are, as music is. They aren't just like these goofy little collections of sprites, that you can actually laugh, you can cry, you can have real meaning with it. Fire Emblem 7 in many ways kind of comes across as a bit of a Shakespearean tragedy almost. It's this tale of love, betrayal, duty, honor, etc. Now this is kind of what I wanted to do in the previous one, but I kind of rambled on too long. So this is kind of a reactionary overview of this series. The Fire Emblem series, and part of the reason I loved it even back in the day, is Fire Emblem is a reactionary series. It's extremely conservative. You could probably even say traditionalist. Now, I just like to address the elephant in the room, which is women fighting. In all the Fire Emblem games, even back before this was really an issue, women always fought in them. Now, there's a number of reasons for this. Number one, a lot of the women are nobility. And there's always been a different set of rules for female nobles as opposed to normal people. They can do things that normal people can't. I think it's also important to recognize that even though these games take place in kind of a Western setting, with the exception of Fates, these are based on kind of Japanese culture and Japanese social mores. In medieval Japan, it was uncommon but not really rare for women to fight. Women of the samurai caste tended to be, I'm not sure if they had armor, but they tended to receive military training in a similar style to males. The expectation is while the samurai were away, the female samurai would defend their homes. They'd be trained normally with a naginata or a yumi, and they were very skilled. They would tend to use kind of skill weapons or speed weapons instead of heavy weapons, but they'd have full military training, and if bandits came along, they could fight them off. There's even stories of legendary female samurai who took part in major battles. And it was interesting because there was often kind of a feminine quality to them. They often had long hair and they'd wear makeup and stuff, but they'd also kind of be warriors. So I guess my point is, well, it seems like really kind of cultural Marxist to us. In a Japanese context, it's not really as unheard of. In the West, we've always seen the idea of women fighting as completely abhorrent. In Japan, particularly in the Meiji era and later on, this was seen as a really bad thing because of the influence of Neo-Confucianism. But I'm just trying to say, in a medieval Japanese context, there's a lot more kind of wiggle room. And this is part of the reason why you see this a lot more common in Japanese stuff, to have women fighting and women to have, like, magic and stuff. This also exists often along with kind of a paradoxical, in Japanese stuff, it's much more common for the women to take a submissive role in the relationship. Like, they may want to fight and they may want to be like a knight, but they also want to be a good wife. They want to, like, cook and clean for the husband and bear their children. And there's kind of this strange conflict between the two, but that's just kind of Japanese culture. It's not really necessarily an innovation, it's just kind of the way it is. So, Fire Emblem, The Burning Blade follows our three lords, Lyn, aka Lindis, Hector, and Ellawood. And I like all three of them. Lyn was actually my first waifu. And I say that unironically. As a hormonal kid, when I first saw her, I immediately, I didn't know what a waifu was, but she was my waifu. Let me just get some pictures of Lyn. So here are some pictures of Lyn. I think you can see why I kind of want her to be a waifu. She's gorgeous, she has long hair, the green actually fits her very well. She wears tasteful but kind of revealing clothing. She's very well proportioned and fit. She also has a very kind of nice personality. And this kind of brings us to something I just kind of want to touch on before we get too much into the kind of the plot of the Fire Emblem games. Part of the traditional aspect is almost everybody in all the characters you recruit are lords, are knights, are are scholars, are priests, are clergy members, and they all possess, or most of them do, some of them don't, but most of them possess an extreme dedication to duty, to honor, to friendship. In Fire Emblem 7, Lyn, Hector, and Elowood are all lords. They're fighting for the protection of their kingdoms. They're fighting for the independence of their people. They're willing to risk their lives to fulfill their duty. It's a very common goal in these games, particularly through support conversations, that the rulers or the lords will be like, I want to become a better person, to rule over my people. I want to do everything for my people. I want to be a proper king, and that's why something happens. Often, kind of the most kind of complementary support conversations that lead to marriages are where one character, the female character, kind of completes the male character, and kind of is like, maybe he's a hothead and she's calm, maybe he's kind of a player and she kind of gets him to settle down and be faithful to her. Virtually all the marriages, particularly in the later ones, are framed in the context of, we're in love, let's get married. There's not really much of a hint of premarital sex in the Fire Emblem games. It seems more or less, when people decide they're in love and that they're compatible, they get married, and they immediately have children. And that's kind of very traditional. And the marriages are portrayed as, generally speaking, being quite happy. Sometimes there's some conflict in them, but you don't have like everybody just getting divorced or everybody just fucking everybody. Obviously, people can get married to different people in different times, but those are just kind of alternate timelines. People don't just get married to everybody and fuck everybody. Most of the characters are looking for a stable marriage. They're looking for a relationship with someone they can love, that they can have offspring with, that they can continue and fulfill their duty with. And that's kind of part of just why they're so reactionary. There's a general lack of degeneracy. There's a general celebration of kind of beautiful aristocratic people fulfilling their duties in a relatively uncorrupt manner. And kind of very classical, kind of almost courtly romance mixed in with kind of a bit of funny, kind of quirky personality flaws. And I really like that. It's nice to play something that's not cynical. It's nice to play something that treats marriage as a necessity. It's nice to play something that kind of has these traditional values. So, to the gameplay, to the game. So, Fire Emblem 7, you can pick one of three stories. You can pick Lyn's story, which is the prologue, which is a lot of fun. You can pick Elowood's story, or you can pick Hector's story. Now, Elowood's story is the default after you beat Lyn's story. After you beat Elowood's story, you unlock Hector's story. Hector and Elowood's stories take place concurrently. So, the game starts off with Lyn, aka Lindis. She's a girl from Sacia, which is kind of like the steppes. She kind of has a bit of a Japanese mystique, but also kind of like I don't know, a Cossack thing. Kind of a Cossack Tatar thing. So it's kind of like Far Eastern Europe. So she finds you. Your character in this game is a tactician named Mark, which is kind of a strange profession, I know. But later on, your character will become an actual physical character that you can manipulate and you can get married off. It's kind of implied that Lyn has a crush on you, and that your character, even though he's silent, kind of has a reciprocal relationship. So Lyn finds you. So she tells you that she was recently orphaned due to bandits attacking her tribe. I think the majority of her tribe has been killed at this point, and she's left alone. Lyn is a girl of the plains, and she's basically a swords master. She's trained with katana, and she's extremely fast. She has very high critical hit rates, etc. So she decides to travel with Mark because there's nothing really left to do. So before they leave, they go to visit the shrine of the Mani Kadi, which is the sacred sword that a saint wielded. There is I think it's 5 or 6. Each nation in this Fire Emblem timeline has a founding figure, and each one wielded a legendary weapon. And the nations are kind of founded based around these people, and they're held up as saints, and they try to emulate them. So, Lyn is permitted to touch the Mani Kadi, and it chooses her as its wielder, kind of signifying her right to rule, as we'll see later, and it's given to her. and she uses it as her personal weapon for the rest of the game. As for you're going to see the Manny Caddy, two knights show up, Kane and Kent and Sane. In most Fire Emblem games, there's kind of repeated characters, which people say is lazy, but I like it because it provides a lot of continuity between games that aren't linked by plot. So you can go, oh, this character's in this template, or oh, this character's in this model, and they're always slightly different, but it kind of gives you that nice sense of continuity between the games. So they tell Lynn that she is actually the heir to the throne of Kalen, which is a nearby kingdom. Apparently, the son of the duke there married a girl from the plains, and his uncle and their uncle exiled them, and that was Lynn's parents who recently died, and they had been sent to go and rescue her by the duke. Unfortunately, the duke's brother Longrin is trying to kill Lynn so he can inherit the dukedom himself. So we kind of see almost kind of like this Hamlet sort of thing, where we have the usurper who's trying to kill the king and take his position. And this is kind of a traditional idea that so long as the true king is on the throne, the land is wealthy and prosperous. So, let's see here. So he's the brother of Lynn's grandfather who desires to succeed. So this is kind of the tutorial. We learn different things. We learn how classes promote, etc. We see Lynn gradually kind of transition. It's a fairly short campaign. It's kind of a tutorial. It's, I think, 11 or 12 chapters. We see Lynn kind of transition from being kind of a somewhat cold to a more warm and loving girl. We see her kind of meet former friends, make new ones, and kind of learn how to be a leader. Eventually, she comes to defeat her wicked uncle and retake the throne. Her grandfather had been being poisoned, and since they remove him being poisoned, he's able to live a while longer. Lynn then sets out to continue, because along the way she ran into a strange dancer named Ninian, and they're being pursued by a shadowy organization called the Black Flame. Along the way, Lynn meets Ellawood. Ellawood is the guy with red hair who's the father of Roy. Ellawood is an extremely polite, noble figure who is the lord of Feria, the Marquis of Feria. He's an exceedingly skilled fighter. He's kind of an all-round fighter, as opposed to Lynn, who's a speed fighter, and Hector's, who's a strength and defense fighter. So, after the events of the prologue, the tactician is left wandering, and he runs into Ellawood. So Ellawood has set out in search of his missing father, and he meets up with Hector. Now Hector's kind of the interesting one in the trio. I really like Hector. Hector is brash, he's hot-headed, he's kind of a man's man. He fights with an axe instead of a sword, he wears heavy armor. His promotion, so the promotion for the three lords are Lynn becomes a Blade Lord, which is pretty obvious what it is. Hector becomes a Great Lord, which is pretty obvious, and Ellawood becomes a Night Lord, who rides a horse. So Hector's very brash, he's very hot-headed, he has a big heart, he has a great sense of justice. He's just very kind of unrestrained in his style. Lynn and Ellawood are a lot more kind of restrained and polite. Lynn's in particular is a bit more cold. Hector's kind of a man who lives life to its fullest. That doesn't mean he's like a hedonist or anything. He's just very kind of brash and choleric in his style. So they meet up, and while they're away, Hector's brother, who is the Duke of, the Marquis of another one of the kingdoms, gets killed. So Hector goes back to try to figure out who killed his brother, and he's able to get there in time to find that his dying words are that both Ellawood's father and Hector's brother were killed by the shadowy organization called the Black Fang. So we go through a bunch of different stuff. It turns out in the meantime, in the time between the first and second campaign, Lynn has been forced out of her kingdom, and Ellawood and Hector go and recapture the castle and restore Lynn to the throne. Lynn thereon joins your party. Now, Lynn can romance any number of different characters. She can romance Ellawood, of course. and they get along very well. They kind of have one of those perfect marriages. Her romance with Hector, though, is very heated. They both have very strong, stubborn personalities, and they kind of seem the couple that just has overwhelming passion in their marriage, both positive and negative. And if it works out, it'll burn brighter than just about any other relationship possibly can. But if it fails, they'll probably try to kill each other. She can also romance Wrath, who is a nomad. He's kind of like a Cossack from the territory that she's from. Let's see here. I should note that traditionalism is very important. Lynn is a very traditionalist girl. She's very big on her heritage, etc. Most of the characters in Fire Emblem tend to be very traditional in the way that they deal with things, just because it's kind of that era. So, so we meet up with a spy, and it turns out that the Black Fang is being controlled by Nurgle, which is a really cool name. It's actually a name of, I think, some sort of pagan god from the Middle East. I forget if Nurgle's mentioned in the Bible or not. And he wants to start a war throughout Lycia between the various kingdoms for unknown reasons, and he's been manipulating things behind the scenes. It also turns out he's created an army of morphs, which is a humanoid creature created with magic that serves Nurgle. Under him, Nurgle has the four holy, has the four swords, the four fangs of the Black Fang, and this is kind of a reoccurring theme. We have like the four holy generals, we have the four great lords. Normally, the big bad has four people who serve under him. So they track down Nurgle to his apparent headquarters, and we're able to find Elwood's father just as he dies. Nurgle takes the rest of Elbert's energy and feeds it into the strange dancer named Ninian and forces her to summon a dragon. As it's about to come through the portal, Niles comes in and brings Nina to her senses. Now, this is a recurring theme in Fire Emblem. Dragons are basically gods. In Fire Emblem Fates, people actually worship dragons. It's not uncommon to worship dragons. Dragons are such immense power that one is almost capable of destroying the world. And normally, sometime in the lore of Fire Emblem, there'll be like a dead dragon, or there'll be the dragons were sealed off, etc. So, unsure of how to stop Nurgle, they go off to meet a living legend named, aka the Archsage Athos, one of the veterans of the Scouring. I talked about the whatchamacallit, the heroes and the saints who founded the various kingdoms of the world. He's one of the surviving ones. He's extended his lifespan by 1,000 years through sleep and other things to enable himself to be alive in case Nurgle was to come back. Nurgle's another one of the living legends, and you eventually meet, I'm trying to remember his name. There's another character you meet who is a third member of that. So the sage tells them to go and retrieve the sacred weapons from where they're being stored, because they're the only things that can defeat Nurgle and can harm a dragon, as that's what they were built to. So a bunch of things happen, and they succeed in getting to the tomb of the where the tomb of the various lords who are great lords from the past who are dead, where they meet a druid who has essentially lobotomized himself magically and his soul's left his body, and he did this so he could stay alive long enough to meet with whatever heroes would come and pass on the weapons. So he gives Ellawood the sacred blade Durandal. The druid's kind of interesting because he has no personality, so he just speaks in the manner of whoever's talking to, and he's kind of a mirror, which is interesting. There's a lot of very kind of tragic figures through this. I'm not really going into detail because I want to get through this, but there's kind of a Shakespearean tragedy to most of the characters. So Ellawood takes Durandal, Hector takes the legendary axe, Armadaz, and Lynn takes the legendary blade, the Soul Caddy, which is not to the same degree as legendary, which I think she kind of got gypped on, but whatever. So let's see here. So, um, wielding the blades, they leave the the shrine of seals, and a massive ice dragon appears. Ellawood, the sword Durandal takes control of Ellawood, and it forces him to kill the dragon. Unfortunately, it turns out the dragon was actually Ninian, who we mentioned earlier, who Ellawood had actually canonically been in love with. She was kind of the love of his life. She was a dancer who was beautiful and had a gentle soul, and whose personality complemented Ellawood's really well. And Nurgle had forced her to transform into a dragon to use back into a dragon to use her soul for some or her power for some sort of ritual, to open to the gateway to the world where the dragons still reside. So so he transformed her into a dragon basically to fuck with Ellawood and get her to kill Ninian. So Ellawood has kind of once again kind of a Shakespearean tragedy. The weapon he sought to save his kingdom has resulted in him killing the love of his life. I don't think Ninian actually dies though. I think she's just very Ninian uses the last for strength to transform back and dies as a human in Ellawood's arms, telling her eternal love for him. Athos attempts to kill Nurgle, but it fails, and Hector and Ellawood leave to go and fight Nurgle once and for all. Athos tells them the backstory of Nurgle, who's also kind of Shakespearean. He and Nurgle were once best friends and came from the hidden village of Arcadia, where humans and dragons lived in peace. Nurgle spent his time learning about the secrets of quintessence, which is kind of like magic, which slowly distorted his soul. So he delved too deep into the abyss, into the forbidden things where no man's meant to go, using the knowledge of dragons, and went insane. So Athos and the residents of Arcadia teamed up to defeat Nurgle, but he fled to Bern, taking control of the Black Fang while he was there. It's also revealed that Nurgle is actually the father of Ninian and Niles, who's Ninian's brother, and he was born, and they are the children of him and a dragon in human form. It's kind of implied that he sent them back to the world where the dragons are when his wife was kidnapped, to protect them. However, over time, Nurgle went insane because his goal was to kind of drain the life force of various people in the world so he could reopen the gate and pull his children back so he could be with them once again. He eventually, over time, by draining so many people, he kind of became like a hollow, and he forgot the love of his wife and the love of his children. He only remembered that his wish had been to open the gate and claim the power within. So he's kind of a Shakespearean figure. I think to a large extent it's implied that the destruction of Arcadia, that humans kind of slaughtered and drove off the dragons, and kind of the last place where they coexisted was destroyed. And because of all of that, and because of his love for dragons, he was driven insane and believed that humanity was fundamentally evil and that it needed to be exterminated. And to that end, he needed to become as strong as possible. It's kind of revenge for what happened to his wife and children. So once again, he's a tragic figure. He's an extremely evil man, but he's also kind of a tragic figure. So we get to the final chapter of the game. So in the final chapter, Athos shows up personally to assist you in the battle against Nurgle. Athos wields the light magic of a female saint who's implied to have been the love of his life, who died, and he's had to exist for 1,000 years without her. And he uses the light magic, and he's probably the most effective member of your party in fighting Nurgle, because Nurgle's a dark druid, and light beats dark in this game. Nurgle also, kind of fascinatingly, resurrects all the bosses from the game that you fought before as morphs, as hollow beings created with magic. However, they're much stronger than they were before. They're all level 40, meaning level 20, then level 20 more levels. and they will positively kick your ass if you're not extremely careful. They only send like 3 or 4 of them at you at a time, but even then, there's a couple of them that can just slaughter your entire party single-handedly. So, Nurgle, before Nurgle's defeated, he uses his dying breath to open the portal to the dragon world and summons 3 dragons to go and destroy the world and take his final revenge. Brahminad, the guy who's merely a reflection, intervenes and uses the last of his life force to bring Ninian back from the dead. Ninian succeeds in killing and wounding one of the dragons in pursuit of humanity, and the last boss is the last fire dragon. After the battle, Athos collapses from exhaustion as he dies, predicts that an evil star will rise over Bern. But once again, Lycia will bring hope to cleanse the darkness, which refers to Fire Emblem 6, because Fire Emblem 7 is a prequel to it. And the King of Bern actually becomes possessed by a demonic dragon. So, Hector and Elowood are both crowned marquises of their respective places. Lynn is not mentioned because she can be the father of either of their children. As Ninian has been brought back to life, she could still wind up with Hector. A lot of characters are just not mentioned in these earlier ones in the ending because of the ambiguous nature of their ultimate fates. So Fire Emblem 7 is a Shakespearean tragedy in which pretty much all the characters face immense suffering and trouble as a result of their duties. Virtually everyone in it was either a good person initially and became corrupt, or is a good person who became hollowed from the passage of time and no longer really was able to understand even what they valued. Of all the Fire Emblem games, I would say this one has by far the best plot. There's kind of a lot of it has a myriad of good characters, excellent gameplay, and the ability to play the second half of the story as Hector gives you a completely different perspective of it, which I didn't even really talk about much. It's similar, but Hector's the main character. He gets a lot more screen time, and we learn a lot more about his personality. More options are always good, particularly in games like this. Fire Emblem The Burning Blade is one of the best games of all time, and is probably, arguably, the best Fire Emblem game, I would say. It lacks many of the refinements of the newer games, and there is still the permanent death thing, which I've never liked. But overall, it's a great game, and we'll be continuing on to the Sacred Stones next. It'll be much shorter because I don't have much to say about the Sacred Stones, but I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll talk to you later.